The trio of Guts, Griffith, and Casca have been through a lot to say the least. They started off as comrades in arms, but along the way, the annoying human trait called emotions came into play, and it led to events that can only be described as nightmarish. Casca can't even look at either man without having a mental breakdown, and considering what she went through during and after the eclipse, we can't blame her. But once she recovered enough to remember who she was, that brought the question that we've posed in the title of this video to our minds. And the reason for that is one sentence from chapter 238, spoken by none other than Guts' personal Herald of Doom, Skull Knight. After giving the swordsman hope in the form of Casca's recovery, he also warned Guts that his wish might not align with hers. And now that she's been taken to Falconia by Griffith, every passing day makes us think that this is what he was talking about. So, in this video, we're going to take a look at Casca's dynamic with both men over the course of the series, and try to understand who she might end up with, if anyone at all. The two faces of love, Casca, Guts, and Griffith before the eclipse. Berserk is a love story. This statement sounds wild to those that are unfamiliar with the actual content of the series, because how can we say that after seeing all the atrocities Miura so graphically depicted in his panels? But when you strip away all of that and take a look at the Golden Age art from the perspective of a political drama, you realize that at its heart lies what is essentially a love triangle. And the person that's the epicenter of it all is none other than Casca. The female commander of the Falcons was introduced as a blind follower of Griffith's who listened to his every command, not just because he was her leader, but also because she loved him. It was plain for all to see, but none brought it up because they valued their lives a bit more than banter. The reasons behind her love for Griffith were addressed in the Casca chapters, where we learn that he saved her from being assaulted when she was a child. Not only that, Griffith gave her a sword and the strength to protect herself when she needed it the most. For that, she felt indebted to him. There was a practical element to her decision to join the Falcons as well. Casca's family had just sold her to a complete stranger because they had too many mouths to feed and not enough food. That stranger was now dead, and if she went back with her story, she would be too. At best, no one would believe her. Worst case scenario, she's executed for killing a noble. So in a way, she had no other choice, but you can tell that she thought she owed her life to him because she repeatedly compared Griffith to an angel or a god. A life debt is a tricky concept and one that is commonly used in fiction. One character is saved by another and feels like they owe their entire lives to that person, so they dedicate themselves to them. The real life origin of this concept is a bit murky, but it isn't too hard to imagine that life debt is a concept that carries over in real life. Just think about your own lives. Have you ever been in an extremely tight spot? Say you were broke and needed a place to crash, and someone gave you a helping hand at that exact moment. Wouldn't you feel at least a little indebted to them? Like you owe them something for being there when you were at your worst? Well, intensify that emotion by 1,000 times and throw in an actual life or death situation, and that's what a life debt is like. This debt can create deep bonds between two characters and lead to heroic sacrifices you never saw coming, but in the world of fantasy, it's often used as a means of control. A life debt in the right hands can lead to salvation, but it can also make a character give over their lives to another unnecessarily, and that's where the trouble begins. How many times have we seen the act of rescue being used as a bargaining chip in modern fantasy? Far too many, right? Well, Miura put his own spin on that concept by making his life debts look like choices. With Casca, it was her choice to join the band of the Falcon and worship Griffith the way she did. The same was true for Guts joining as well, because he could have just as easily broken his oath and run away from the band after he lost to Griffith. Honor among mercenaries did not exist. Guts learned this harsh truth growing up in Gambino's crew, yet he honored the way of the sword and accepted his defeat with grace, instead of refusing the fight and being on his way. And once he became a Falcon, he too started feeling indebted to Griffith for accepting him instead of treating him like a cur. That's one of two things Guts and Casca had in common for the first 3 years of their association, with the second being a mutual dislike of one another. Casca had spent most of her adolescent life as Griffith's right hand. She was the one he turned to first for everything, be it matters of politics or warfare. In a way, that satisfied her debt to him, because she thought that as long as she was indispensable to him, she was okay with keeping her feelings for him suppressed. But then, Guts came into the picture. His natural ability as a warrior far surpassed any of the other Falcons, displacing Casca from that pedestal. This made her jealous of him to no end, and that jealousy manifested itself as her scrutinizing his every move, no matter how effective it was in achieving results. The Band of the Falcon was Griffith's baby. They existed to make his dream a reality, but after Guts joined them, Griffith started moving his plans around to accommodate the guy, and that's the kind of attention he never gave to anyone, let alone Casca. For his part, Guts couldn't understand why Casca was so high-strung, and he didn't care to find out. He took his life one battle at a time, and he preferred to be in the moment. Yet, he did recognize the fact that Griffith's bold ambition had inspired him to fight for a cause other than survival, he had come to see his comrades as more than just men-at-arms. The Falcons gave him a taste of true brotherhood for the first time in his life, and Guts' happiest years were spent swinging his sword for Griffith's cause. Things would have probably stayed that way had these two not overheard Griffith and Charlotte's conversation at Primrose Hall, but perhaps it was fate that made that happen. Chapter 12 led to a major perspective change for Griffith's top two commanders without his awareness. Guts realized that he was nothing more than a tool to Griffith and he wanted to be his friend, so he mentally decided that he was going to leave the Falcons, find his own dream, and cling to it so hard that Griffith had no choice but to accept him as an equal. As for Casca, she realized that everything she had hoped to be died that night because Griffith had already made his move on Princess Charlotte and she was falling for it hook, line, and sinker. Casca thought that if Guts replaced her as Griffith's sword, then maybe she could be his woman. She couldn't deny her feelings for him her entire life and she wasn't delusional. She knew how she felt about Griffith and she also knew that for his dream to become reality, his easiest path would be seducing Charlotte. We're pretty sure while Mura was focusing on Guts' reaction in chapter 12, Casca was thinking that she should have confessed a long time ago to him, because now there was no point. As for Griffith, well, he was aware of the effect he had on people when they came across him. He was unaware of just how serious his negligence of the same could be, not just for them, but for him as well. The Falcon might have proclaimed that he had no friends among the Falcons, but his treatment and opinion of Guts was proof of the opposite. Griffith wouldn't speak with the swordsman often, but when he did, he would discuss his innermost thoughts and feelings with him, and he'd do so willingly, which is a major departure from the Genin explanation he gave to Casca, where he was pretty much rambling subconsciously. His focus was so honed in on achieving his dream, he didn't even notice he was making friends, or that his top two commanders had fallen, but we don't think he'd have cared if it happened under his control. The fact that it didn't is what likely motivated his actions post-incarceration, but we'll get to that in a few moments. While Griffith was busy politicking his way to the top, Guts was saving Casca from death on the battlefield, and as a consequence of that, their dynamic changed considerably. The night of the 100-man slaying was the first time Casca saw that Guts did in fact care about his comrades. She had spilled her guts to him in her titular chapters, but she wasn't physically strong enough to fight. The pair were ambushed by the Tudor Empire's Blue Whale Knights, and Casca would have gotten herself killed had Guts not been with her. He gave her the push she needed to clear out and spent the rest of the night killing every man that tried his patience. During that night, he thought to himself why he was fighting this intently for a cause he didn't even believe in like that anymore, and Casca flashed across his mind. She rushed back to him with reinforcements for her part, but was extremely glad to see him alive and hugged him for the first time in 3 years. She was the one who saw to Guts' wounds following the battle, and when the swordsman decided to leave the Falcons, she realized that she didn't want him to go. Even Judo was shocked by the fact that Casca was willing to get Griffith to stand down and talk things through with Guts, when usually she wouldn't question him even if he asked her to jump off a cliff. These conflicting emotions became stronger within her during the year that the Falcons spent on the run, and we're sure it wasn't easy for Casca to reconcile the fact that Griffith's treason was him getting caught with Charlotte, which she learned about in chapter 52. In fact, she was so focused on staying alive that her emotions just welled up inside her like a dam, which broke when Guts returned to aid the Falcons in chapter 42. In the aftermath of their battle with Salat and his mercenaries, Guts and Casca have a conversation that starts out as a fight, but ends with them consummating their love for each other. These two were always alone in the world, but now that they had each other, they knew life wasn't going to be empty for much longer. Mura was cruel for not even giving us a proper honeymoon phase for Guts and Casca's relationship because it pretty much ended as soon as it began. The pair opened up to each other in a way that no one expected they would, especially Guts. He admitted to things from his childhood that he had never spoken of to anyone, but with Casca, he was comfortable sharing. Casca had realized that she liked Guts long before she started getting hunted by the king's men, but only now could she express her feelings, and to have them reciprocated by him made her feel comforted in a way that Griffith had never made her feel. Their first date was basically them going to rescue their boss, but perhaps they should have taken a short detour before getting there because they had no idea that their entire lives were about to change. We don't know what condition the Falcons thought Griffith would be in after a year in prison, but they clearly didn't expect him to be mangled within an inch of his life. Everyone else was focusing on the task of getting Griffith to safety and then getting the hell out of Midland, but the Falcon himself was focused on something else entirely. If you've seen our video on what would have happened if Griffith and Casca got married, you'll know that the fallen Falcon was deeply jealous of her relationship with Guts. Griffith blamed Guts' departure for everything that had gone wrong with his life. This is one aspect of his personality that was a mere image of Casca's. He couldn't accept that he was the one who decided to sleep with Charlotte on impulse, got caught doing it, and then made it worse by antagonizing the king. Casca used to not be able to stomach her own jealousy for Guts, but at least she was self-aware enough to know what she was feeling. Griffith had no clue, and the torture didn't help. After having his arms, legs, tongue, and several inches of flesh taken away from him, all Griffith could feel was his powerlessness. Seeing Guts as a part of his rescue team enraged him, not just because he blamed the guy for his condition, but also because of how powerful Guts had become in that time. He needed to feel that way himself, so he tried to force himself on the one person he thought would take it without question, Casca. Perhaps if this was pre-Midland Casca, his antics could have worked. But after everything that she went through with Guts, it only made her break down and pity him, not in that order. Right before the eclipse, the dynamic between these three was at an all-time low, and love was involved in each direction. For Casca, she was struggling with her old feelings for Griffith and her new feelings for Guts, but she became aware of both when the former tried to assault her. For Guts, he wanted to explore his new relationship with Casca to its horizon, but her decision to stay with the known devil frustrated and saddened him. He was very mature when it came to understanding how she still felt about Griffith, even though they were technically an item. But the fact that she still felt like she needed to repay her life debt to him made him realize that he always saw things for what they were long after he should. As for Griffith, he was seething in jealousy, and him trying to force himself on Casca was him expressing his toxic love for her, which is nothing more than him trying to control her with his pee-pee, just like he did Charlotte. If we had to put money on who Casca would select before the eclipse, it would have been Guts. But thanks to that infernal night, we're no longer sure that's even possible. The Broken Beauty and the Two Beasts. The harsh truth about Casca's psyche. The eclipse is horrifying for so many reasons, but the biggest one is what Griffith does to Casca in the wake of his rebirth as a demon. We should have honestly anticipated it considering his last interaction with her, but nothing could have prepared us for the intent or the intensity of the act. Griffith didn't just violate Casca during the eclipse, he antagonized Guts while doing it, to establish that he was now the unquestionable top dog of the Falcons. And as long as he wanted to do something, he could do it, with the powers he acquired from the Abyss. The lengths to which he goes to restrain Guts isn't because he's afraid of the guy, it's because he wants him to feel just as helpless as he was during his own torture. As for Casca, well, we're pretty sure he doesn't even think of her as a person anymore. He used to give her the courtesy of human treatment before his imprisonment, but now that he's escaped his mortal coil and transcended humanity, he could finally be honest with her and, for the lack of a better phrase, finish what he started in chapter 71. In her last conscious moments, Casca screamed at Guts to not watch because she could barely comprehend the situation herself. She was being assaulted by the hero that had saved her life. The life debt she owed him was collected by him in this disgusting fashion, and it literally broke her mind. Casca reverted to a childlike state following the eclipse, and Griffith's new form as Femto became the ruler of her haunted mind. During the Corridor of Dreams chapter, we see Shirke and Farnace make their way through Casca's broken psyche in an attempt to restore her to her normal self, which they've never seen. The entire sequence is just a metaphysical rehashing of the eclipse, complete with a guard dog in the Berserker armor, which is supposed to be Guts, and a terrifying falcon as its final boss, which is supposed to be Griffith. Casca herself is represented in the form of a broken doll housed inside of a coffin that Dog Guts lugs around, which is just peak symbolism and iconography by Miura. Casca used to call Guts a mad dog before they got together. Now that mad dog was her guardian within her subconscious mind, and she herself was no bigger than a bean, at least the part of her that still lived. But this doesn't mean that broken Casca saw Guts in a positive light, because trust us when we say, there was a time when he became just as bad as Griffith, and that time came shortly after the Conviction arc, where Guts tried to assault her as well. To make things very clear for you guys, this was not something he did consciously or as a power move. Guts' near assault of Casca was different from Griffith's because it had no ill intent behind it. Guts had spent the last 2 years believing Casca would never change. He'd spent the last 2 years killing monsters humans couldn't even imagine existed, and it took him to places where others would have lost their minds. When he reunited with Casca during the Conviction arc, he vowed to himself that he would never let her out of his sight again, or allow any harm to come to her. But that was him holding on to a naive and indulgent hope of reconnecting with her again. As he fought night after night with another branded individual in tow, he came to realize the difference between fighting to survive and fighting to protect. His sword felt heavier trying to keep himself and Casca alive, and he couldn't be everywhere at once. One day, she escaped their camp and nearly got captured by a group of bandits. Miraculously, Casca's fighting instincts kicked in during a fight or flight situation, and she managed to kill all of them before they got done assaulting. Guts realized she was missing a bit too late, and he arrived after she had killed the bandits. But seeing her covered in blood, holding a sword, and standing over corpses clearly of her own making sent Guts' mind into overdrive. He had wanted Casca to return to her normal state for so long that this made him believe she was okay. Even after the eclipse, before he departed on his journey, Guts had nearly forced himself on Casca after she spilled some soup on herself and had to undress as a result. But his Beast of Darkness wasn't as strong back then as it was in chapter 187 onwards. The Black Swordsman had thought that the flame of rage that kept his heart beating would be replaced by something else once he reunited with Casca, but in the process, Griffith came back to life. Guts had spent 2 years chasing the wind, pursuing faint signals from his brand of sacrifice, and never quite finding a way to directly confront the God Hand. The one time he did, they nearly got him, and while he still has the Behelit from that occasion, he has no idea how to use it. Griffith's incarnation put him on the same soil as Guts, which meant he could finally fulfill his revenge quest. This fueled his Beast of Darkness, which, with a little help from Incubi, started suggesting to Guts that he take Casca's life. Fighting alongside her was clearly a burden to him, one that he couldn't dream of bearing by himself. Killing her, now that would free him. He could throw everything he held dear into the fires of revenge and cast away all doubt that held him back from his true desire. In order to defeat an exceptionally difficult enemy, sometimes you have to become just like them, and the Beast of Darkness was the part of Guts' psyche that always egged him on to do just that. Even before he nearly assaulted her, Guts got possessed by a spirit and accidentally choked Casca, which made her distance herself from him. As he was in the process of doing so, his mind snapped to an image of the beast, which told him to violate her and sacrifice her as an offering to his vengeance. It showed him an image of a decapitated Casca, which is what snapped him out of what he was about to do. Guts felt horrified and disgusted by himself. He had sworn to protect Casca from a fate like this. He had sworn to love her within his own heart, and yet he had nearly become the man that broke her mind himself in pursuit of revenge. From this point onward, he took on companions and kept his distance from Casca because he knew that he needed to do so. He wasn't in control of himself when he was around blood, and Farnace, Serpico, Isidro, and Shirke really helped in that regard. They made his job of protecting Casca much easier, and it was Farnace and Shirke who were directly responsible for making her sane again. His gratitude for his new companions is endless, we're sure, but this is where Skull Knight's line from chapter 238 comes into play. Like we mentioned at the beginning of this video, before his fellow struggler set off for Elfhelm, the Wandering Wraith gave him hope and a warning. He told Guts that should he make it to Elfhelm, its ruler, the Flowerstorm Monarch, could potentially cure Casca's broken mind. This brought a genuine smile to Guts' face for the first time in a long time. But that smile vanished just as quickly when Skull Knight told him all that came after the ordeal that was to come, and even if she was cured, there was no guarantee that Guts' wish would be hers as well. Ever since he took on companions, Guts' wish had been to see Casca safe, sound, and sane again. He had chosen to suppress his demons in favor of love, and all he wanted was to witness Casca's old self once again, live and in the flesh. In that regard, Skull Knight was absolutely right, because while Guts could look at Casca with a straight face, she could no longer stand his presence. During her time as the mindless girl named Elaine, Casca had become something of a silent observer of her own actions. It was as though her life was playing out in third person, and she could do nothing to control it, at least not consciously. But just because she wasn't in the driver's seat doesn't mean she was completely out of her mental vehicle. She was still experiencing everything Elaine experienced, and this included all the moments where Guts threatened her safety. Perhaps Casca was unaware of it, but she had started to equate Guts' near assault on her with the Eclipse, and because that was the trigger of her PTSD-induced panic attacks, whenever she thought back to the old days, she was liable to have a complete meltdown. Guts was especially hard for her to look at because the very sight of him reminded her of all those apostles that tried to assault her. They can talk to each other if Guts is out of Casca's sight, but that's the best it's going to get for them until she can process her memories and give herself some closure. But while her perception of Guts as being a monster is something that can be possibly fixed, considering she can at least walk around him without fearing for her life, the same can't be said for Griffith. To Casca, Griffith is the source of all of her pain these days. She saw him thrice after the Eclipse, once when he had just been reincarnated, then at the Hill of Swords, and finally at Elfhelm. The first time, she was too far from him for her to notice him properly. Also, Zod was blocking her vision. The second time, Griffith straight up saved her from getting crushed to death, and this made her brand of sacrifice explode. Casca pretty much became catatonic, unable to move or think, reaching out for Griffith's face while struggling with her pain. We'll address what the reaching out and saving was all about in the next segment. The cause for the pain and the bleeding should be obvious. Griffith is a god hand now, not a man. The brand of sacrifice responds to the power of evil, and there are no beings in either world more evil than the god hand. Their third post-Eclipse encounter makes that fact even more evident, as this time Griffith kidnaps her. And because Casca is conscious this time, her reaction to seeing Griffith is the same as her reaction to seeing Guts, a complete meltdown. The very sight of him reminds her of all the horrors she has to endure and makes her pass out, which is uncannily similar to her reaction to Guts from chapter 359. It's downright Shakespearean that two men Casca has loved in her life are now the only people she simply cannot see. In her mind, they're worse than beasts. They're demons, and they're the source of many of her pains. Though she doesn't consciously blame Guts for what he did to her in chapter 190, her subconscious remembers. And as for Griffith, well, you guys get it by now. So, having established how Casca's relationship with both Guts and Griffith rose and fell, let us now get to answering the question we posed in our title. What will Guts do when he realizes Casca's true desire? Will she choose Griffith in the end? In the previous section, we mentioned that Guts' true wish following his rescue of Casca from the incarnation ceremony was to keep her safe and make her sane. But the thing is, he doesn't even believe that, and we never did, because his true wish is to fulfill his vengeance against Griffith. Guts hasn't forgotten the 2 years that he spent in the darkness by his lonesome, tracking down the Falcon like a crazed bloodhound with only the faintest of sense to go off of. He would have probably doubled down on protecting Casca had Griffith not incarnated into the physical world, because Guts had no idea how to use a Behelit or whether he was even destined to use one. But because he saw him again, and because he didn't immediately recall his malice in that moment, he was more motivated than ever to kill him. He was just keeping it under wraps until Casca got better. Every time he thought about what came next once Casca was okay, his thoughts would wander to Griffith. Every time he questioned his own path, it would be because he wasn't getting closer to killing Griffith. His obsession with the Falcon birthed the Beast of Darkness, and thanks to the Berserker armor's influence, that beast has taken on a life of its own. Like we mentioned in the previous section, one of the reasons Guts nearly assaulted Casca was because he felt like he was losing his edge by becoming soft again. His inner malice has been moving his legs for so long, when he tried shifting gears, it tried to convince him not to. It tried to convince him to return to his loneliness, and he nearly did. Once he restrained himself, Guts learned the value of keeping his emotions in check, and doubly so after acquiring the Berserker armor. Yet, while Casca was undergoing her awakening process, all Guts could think of was how he could finally hunt down Griffith without worries. Of course, that last bit changes when the Falcon kidnaps Casca from Elfhelm and flies her off to Falconia, which utterly breaks the Black Swordsman. Guts is still not recovered from the emotional and psychological effects of losing Casca once again, after sacrificing so much to get her back, and his Beast of Darkness is more prone to taking over his psyche than ever before. It practically taunted him for being a weakling without it in chapter 373, and we're afraid he will agree with it once he gains consciousness for a sustained period of time. If he acquiesces to the Beast's demands, he might just bring that vision of him beheading Casca from chapter 190 to life, and that's a terrifying prospect. But what's even scarier is the moment when Guts realizes the true meaning behind Skull Knight's prophecy from chapter 238. So remember how we told you guys in the previous section that during their second encounter post-incarnation, Griffith mysteriously saved Casca from being stoned to death? Well, it wasn't Griffith who did that, it was Guts and Casca's demon child. During the incarnation ceremony, the egg of the perfect world ended up swallowing the demon child, who was dying after having spent its life force trying to protect Casca. When the power of evil surged into him in order to give Femto a body of flesh, instead of creating a fetus from scratch, it mutated the demon child's body into Griffith's and merged the two into one compound being. On most nights, this being was Griffith, the fifth God Hand member who was posing as the savior of the world when he was the one that plunged it into darkness in the first place. But on nights of the full moon, he would turn into the Moonlight Boy, the manifestation of the demon child through Griffith's vessel, and go visit his parents for some nostalgic warmth. When Casca first met the boy, she was Elaine, so she wasn't conscious of her motherly actions towards him or the reason behind them. But when she regained her mind and spent a day with the boy, she realized that this was her demon child, and this is what Skull Knight's warning was truly about. The reason Griffith kidnapped Casca wasn't because he wanted to torture her further, although he's pretty much doing that by keeping her mind controlled in Falconia. It was because she had now become his only weakness, and in order to cover that up, he needed her around himself at all times. If Casca was left with his enemies any longer, it would only be a matter of time before they realized the Moonlight Boy's real identity and possibly tried to kill it, so he had to cover all his bases. But for Casca, her demon child was the anchor of her existence post-Eclipse. In the Quarter of Dreams, when Shirkei and Farnace made it into the central chamber, they saw that it was the demon child that was the final fragment representing Casca's sanity. This makes sense because it was the only thing that she felt an instinctual bond with and acted like a grown-up with during her Elaine years. Casca had scooped up the demon child with her arms right after its birth, and despite its appearance, she loved it as a mother. However, this is where the conflict that can undo her relationship with Guts arises, because the demon child is now a part of Griffith's body, and Guts has already tried to kill it in front of her once. The last time the Black Swordsman saw the kid was during the incarnation ceremony, but because he has no idea how Griffith came back to the physical world, he doesn't know that the Moonlight Boy is his kid, or that his kid is a part of Griffith's body. Casca does. That's why during her first two encounters with Griffith, she reaches out to him. She isn't trying to go back to the man that violated her, she's trying to reach out to her child that has become a part of her violator's body. To Casca, her baby is everything. It was the only reason she could survive as Elaine, besides Guts of course. She has already tried to save it from his wrath once, because soon after its birth, Guts tried stomping that baby out. Casca stopped him violently then, and we're sure she would do so now as well. During the Corridor of Dreams ritual, Shirkei thinks that Skull Knight's warning about Guts and Casca's wishes not aligning refers to the curse on her heart that represents her Eclipse PTSD, but in reality, it's their conflict over the demon child, which bleeds into his deep desire for vengeance against Griffith. Now that Griffith and the child were one and the same, Guts could kill two birds with one stone. But that is also why Casca would stand against him, because to her, that child has done nothing wrong. If anything, it's always tried to help its parents, and that includes Guts as well. When he was the demon child, he gave Guts the warning that led him to saving Casca in St. Albion. As the Moonlight Boy, he saved Guts' life from the Berserker armor on multiple occasions. He's the reason the Black Swordsman's psyche hasn't been consumed by the armor, because the Moonlight Boy's astral body is immensely powerful. The question of who Casca will end up with goes beyond romantic love at this point, because on that front, it's pretty clear she would choose Guts. In chapter 372, we get a rare glimpse into her point of view, and the main thing that's on her mind is that she needs to get back to Guts. As Griffith was flying away with her, she was worried about how this would affect him, and when she snapped out of her mind control in Falconia, she immediately tries to escape in order to return to her man. It's possible that she still hasn't spent a day with the Moonlight Boy in Falconia, but once she does, there's no telling whether she will even think about Guts at that point. If the climactic decision of Berserk came down to offing the boy, we don't think Casca would allow anyone to go through with it, even if it was Guts. She would stand and protect him like a mother would, and this could be the thing that ends up bringing the Beast of Darkness's vision from chapter 190 to fruition. When it comes to romantic love, a girl chooses the man that treats her the best. But for a mother, her child comes before everyone else, including the man she loves. Should Studio Gaga make the Moonlight Boy the Achilles heel of Griffith's current existence, you can expect Casca to pick him over Guts, and at that point, it's anybody's guess how things will proceed. It really depends on the state of mind of the Black Swordsman, and as things stand, that's precarious at best, and absolutely apocalyptic at worst. Marvelous verdict! We do apologize if you thought the answer to who Casca will end up with would have a clear answer in either Guts or Griffith, but the truth is, things just aren't that simple anymore. A core part of Casca is now inside of Griffith, and Guts wants to kill both it and him. She wants to return to Guts as soon as possible, but what happens when she realizes she can spend more time with her son if she stays in Falconia? That's the question we're personally waiting to get an answer to, but we disagree with Shirkei when she says Casca's PTSD is the answer to Skull Knight's riddle. She's an extremely smart kid, but she's gotten one omen wrong already, and it's sort of led to the destruction of Elfhelm. But that's just our opinion on the matter. What do you guys think? Let us know in the comments down below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and until we meet again, always remember, keep on struggling, strugglers.